Hello, everybody. This is the Wine Communicators of Australia webinar series. We'll be starting in about 20 seconds once everyone's had a chance to log in. So sit tight and we'll wait and see how many people can log in, and then we'll get going. Okay, I mean, it looks like there's quite a few people that have logged in already, so we'll kick this off. Good afternoon. I'm Ruth Harris. I'm the Executive Officer here at Wine Communicators of Australia. Thank you for joining us for this month's webinar, the Wine Communicators of Australia webinar series, Acknowledgement of Country Done Right. I'm actually coming to you from Paramount Country in the Adelaide Hills in South Australia. If you look out there, you can see the beautiful vineyards. Today, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who have joined us on the call. And we also acknowledge their strong connection to country and the importance of seasons, which we share as people who are involved in an agricultural pursuit of wine. Today's presentation will probably take about 45 minutes, and Michael actually welcomes questions during the presentation as well, and he'll make specific breaks for that. In terms of questions, if you look on your screen, you need to find the Q&A box. So there's a chat box, and that's for more like technical questions, but we want you to ask your questions in the Q&A box. If you can't see it at the moment, click the three dots on the bottom of your screen and it should pull up the Q&A box. The reason is those questions are saved in the Q&A, are saved by Zoom, so we can see them later and contact you. As per usual, this webinar is recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you after we've finished recording. I wanted to hold this webinar today because I admit that since I started in the role at WCA and I had to start giving acknowledgements of country at the start of webinars, I felt a bit awkward doing it. And I thought if I do, probably a lot of other people do too. So I did do some cultural awareness training as part of the Adelaide Hills wine region. And I came to understand that it was okay to vary the script a little bit, which just intrigued me that how could we communicate this to all the rest of the wine communicators on what's okay to vary and what's okay to do and what's okay not to do. So I've asked Michael Ingray, who's an experienced CEO and First Nation leader, to present this webinar today, just to help us feel more comfortable and confident about acknowledging our Indigenous people appropriately. So I'm going to hand you over to Michael now, who will better introduce himself and his own origins, and remember to ask your questions in the Q&A box. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Ruth. And hello, everybody. Let's just jump straight into it today. My name is Michael Ingray. I'm based here in Sydney on the northern shore of Botany Bay, and I belong to the Laparoos Aboriginal people that have a community situated here. So people know where Sydney Airport is. We're on the right-hand side of Sydney Airport, and my family and community have been here permanently since 1883. I belong to the Darrell people of coastal Sydney and Illawarra, but also Dunghutti people of the mid-north coast of New South Wales. I've held experiences from designing programs to implementing those programs, to then being either management or executive management of local, regional and national organisations and companies. And they've been in various industries for social, employment, policy. But the most importantly, before I get into that, I'm a partner. I've been with my partner for 15 years. She'll tell you all it's almost a life sentence, but I don't believe that. And I have two beautiful children, which is my biggest role that I play within my life. So some of the companies that I've previously worked for is Inner Sydney Empower Communities, which is a policy development agenda reform company that solely work with all levels of government to implement local and regional programming. The National Indigenous Culinary Institute, which I was the CEO, where we work with fine dining restaurants in Sydney to place Aboriginal people to be the best chefs that they can possibly be in Australia and around the world. And then Empowered Communities, which was a national body established last year to look after 10 regions, Indigenous leaders across. Currently, I do my own consulting work through Bengal Partnerships and also establishing a local Aboriginal health service called Game Health, which I think that I understand the term Game is very familiar with use. For my people here in Sydney, it means large body of water. I also have various membership and governance roles where I sit on the board of the National Indigenous Culinary Institute, but also I am chairman of our traditional owner body here in coastal Sydney and Illawarra. So the presentation that I'm going to give you will give you the smallest insight into First Nations identity, protocols and appropriation. This next hour will give you the opportunity to not be experts. So I highly recommend people don't go out to other stakeholders and also to Aboriginal community and Aboriginal people and saying that you know this is what you should do because Michael Ingray from LAPA has told you so. And this is just something for you to understand. Please take notes and ask questions via the chat that Ruth explained earlier. And one thing, when it comes to questions, there's no question that's a stupid question. I've heard them all. I won't be offended, but please ask away and we can work through the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you. I'm not too sure, but I will find out. So there's 4 parts of today's presentation. So a welcome to country versus acknowledgement of country, First Peoples of Australia's identity, and the multiple labelling of that at a national to state level, but then the labelling of First Peoples of Australia, First Nations or Aboriginal. You'll hear me say a fair few terms throughout this presentation. And then most importantly is when and where appropriate is to do an acknowledgement of country. So the first part of today's session is the welcome to country or acknowledgement of country. So welcome to country is usually delivered by, yes, an Aboriginal person, but it's an Aboriginal person that is a traditional owner from that area. So they're not only just an Aboriginal person or say they're an Aboriginal or they're a traditional owner, is that they have that authority on behalf of their group of people. It is always a way where traditionally it was to welcome visitors. And the biggest part that a lot of non-Aboriginal people understand is when someone knocks at your door for a barbecue and you actually welcome them inside your place. It's very similar, but at a larger scale. It's around how Aboriginal people used to interact together traditionally, and then these things will take place when a neighbouring tribal group or language group would be visiting someone's specific area. So local Aboriginal land councils across Australia do perform welcome to countries and usually engaged or native title representatives. And Aboriginal land councils are usually state-based entities under state legislation and laws, and native title bodies are legislated or operate under the Native Title Act, which is a federal government act. And if they don't provide that as a service, they should be able to direct you who in your area is best to engage with for welcome to countries. There are varying welcome to countries and other services that might be required to perform that, but usually at formal events, you know, it's usually a speech. Some people do like to introduce smoking as a traditional cleansing mechanism that's used for significance, mostly usually for around a tradition that would cleanse an area for bad spirits when an event would happen. There's also dancing and singing could take place depending on the person's cultural levels and their expression on how to to do it appropriately for people to be satisfied in a welcome to country. One of the big misconceptions of people say, I don't want to be welcome to my country of Australia. Traditional owners do not welcome people to the whole of Australia. I think that's the federal government's on their citizenship. They usually do that, but this is more of a term we use, country. Previously, it's been known as language, tribal groups, nations, and it continues. Our labeling for our term land would continue to change, satisfying on the Australian public. So they didn't like the words nation because Australia was a nation and little nations don't exist within Australia. So they say it to traditional lands, and people would say the lands have changed since being European arrival. So to understand, we use the term country, which now may become an issue with some people. Our cultural boundaries have existed. They have not always been the same. Some are fought and lost over wars, but our ancestors lived, and a lot of people in Australia, Aboriginal people today, can trace their ancestry back pre-European arrival. An acknowledgement of country. So for an acknowledgement of country, there is the opportunity for anyone to perform an acknowledgement of country. And it's just to show respect, not only for the traditional owners, but Aboriginal people that also live within that area. And it just is a nice education piece, but also a respect piece, that you acknowledge that the lands that you are operating, that you are visiting, or you're holding some kind of an event, is still acknowledged for the traditional owner connection. The acknowledgement of country can be done by any person, where the welcome is usually done by a traditional owner from that. So an Aboriginal person that is not from that certain area or identified as being a traditional owner would usually do an acknowledgement of country also. There isn't any specific wording for acknowledgement of country, but it's in that when acknowledgement of countries are undertaken, it's to be positive, sincere, and there is some wording that we'll run through on our last slide to give you an understanding on the different levels of acknowledgement of country. So, who can perform a welcome to country? So yes, a traditional owner can perform a welcome to country. But in the demographic of a traditional owner group, usually majority of people would think that an elder or an old person would be the one that performs a welcome to country. This may not necessarily be correct. Welcome to country is going to be anybody within that demographic that has the cultural right to do a welcome to country. So in a school setting, if there is an Aboriginal student that is a traditional owner of that area, they have the right to actually perform the welcome to country. And they would usually mention it's on behalf of their elders and family, which is appropriate. And just like in the previous slide for the acknowledgement of country, anybody can do an acknowledgement of country as long as it's in a sincere and non-offending way. Any questions? Sorry, I can't see the question. So Ruth, is it possible to?
Yes, I'll kick off with some questions. So people haven't asked any questions on the Q&A yet, but I've already got a couple. The first was, with a welcome to country, is there an appropriate response that should be given? I've been over to New Zealand, and I saw a welcoming ceremony that the Maori people gave, and the non-Maori people had a response to that, like there was a known response. I think sometimes a welcome to country is performed and people don't know whether or not they should clap, or, is there one?
Yeah, I think usually today it's given a positive response. So whoever's emceeing the event, they give a positive thanks and a response. I think a clapping would be appropriate, but to be honest, it'd look silly if you're the only one clapping as well. But I think it's the official response from the person that's either in charge or emceeing the event And it's to make that traditional owner feel welcome as well, that not to feel welcome, but a part of the event, and for them to feel comfortable in what they've just delivered because they are representing their family and their people. So,
Right. And what about with the if you ask somebody to perform a welcome to country, like you said, it doesn't have to be an elder, it could be anyone from that land. Um, does that person have to go and get approval from the elder to give that welcome on behalf of the people whose country they're representing? Or is it an implicit right just by the fact that they come from there?
it is a right that they have. Usually out of respect, they do ask the elders within their family or that cultural group. And 9 times out of 10, the elders will be happy for that because it's that promotion, it's that education piece and representation. So it's more of a sustainable model, to ensure that once they pass away, that someone can continue that appropriately. So it is, in Sydney, in especially La Perouse, we have a lot of our school students do welcome to countries where they've sat with our elders. They've actually mimicked what our elders say and do, and use their own experience of culture to do that. And from a community person point of view, it's great to see because it gets them practicing for public speaking. So there's some positives in that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions about Welcome to Country and the difference between Welcome to Country and Acknowledgement of Country? Michael will be talking more about what wording to use later, but any general questions, or otherwise save them and we'll address them
At
at
the
the end.
end,
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Michael.
the labels of First Peoples of Australia, and I think this is where you'll get early, just before in the first few slides, I would use the term First Nations, First Peoples, Aboriginal. And I do like the term First Peoples, but I'll get to that shortly. So in Australia, obviously Aboriginal people is what binds a lot of different language groups together in a national label, if that's what we'll call it. But it always hasn't been that. So since European arrival or European contact in 1770 here in Botany Bay, where I'm situated, the label native came about, and that continued until Australians with European heritage, so both parents were from overseas, they labelled themselves natives of Australia. So it was a term used, which then by the late 1860s, 1870s, the term Aborigine was labelled for Aboriginal people here in Australia. And that term was used by the New South Wales government. So any policies developed after 1883, or any kind of boards were established by government for the protection or overseeing of Aboriginal people, that was used as the term Aborigine was used. Then came along Aboriginal, and Aboriginal was more used, was adopted, but mostly used in the 1970s when out of the land rights activism, but also the establishment of medical service and legal services for Aboriginal people in Sydney and then across the nation, the term Aboriginal was used. And that ran right up until the late 1990s when the term Indigenous was used to collectively bring Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people together as a label nationally. And it was used by the federal government and then the state government for the Sydney 2000 Olympics. From the Sydney 2000 Olympics, First Nations and First Peoples are two labels that have happened, First Peoples being the latest. They're both terms that are new labels, but they've been set up by Aboriginal people. So Aboriginal people have said, no, I like First Nations or First Peoples as the true representation of labelling for Aboriginal people. So if I can give you a good family example, I like the term Aboriginal. I say to people, I'm Aboriginal. My grandmother used the word Aborigines, So she would continue. Her mother used the word Aborigines. Her mother was born in 1884 on Botany Bay. But my grandmother's grandmother referred to herself as native. So depending on the generation, depending on what people feel comfortable, I don't generally feel comfortable with Indigenous, but I do like First Peoples. So you'll see First Peoples throughout this, or I'll refer to Aboriginal. So labelling of First Peoples in Australia. So we've seen Aboriginal or First Peoples or Indigenous was used across the whole of Australia at a national level. Then we have labelling at large region or usually state-based that they've fallen into, but not necessarily correct. So if you have a look at Tasmania on this map in the green, they're known as Aboriginal people that live there, or First Peoples are known as Palawa. For Victoria and then majority of New South Wales, we know we're mentioned as being Koori or Guri from that area. Majority of Queensland and North New South Wales, inland northern New South Wales are Murris. So it's not really state-based, but a lot of state-based is Queensland is Murray and New South Wales is Koori, but culturally those identity boundaries moved across. If you have a look at Northeast Arnhem Land, they go by the name of Yongle. To the Western Australia, Midwest is Yamaji, Southwest is Noongar, Anangu is Central Australia, APY lands from Alice Springs down to South Australia, and then Nunga is mid to South Australia. And these are different regions that bring multiple language groups together, but it's more of a term to identify people from just being Aboriginal. And then we get to a language. So in Australia, language and tribal groups are very similar, if not mirror each other. They're just two different labels that have been used. But there are over 250 languages across Australia. So they are different languages, but they're also, in those languages, there are different dialect groups depending on how large the identified language group is. So where I am here in coastal Sydney, at La Perouse, my traditional lands go from Sydney Harbour down to the Shoalhaven River in Nowra on the south coast of New South Wales. And in that we have two distinct dialects, a northern dialect and a southern dialect. And they're just adapted so we use terms and words in our traditional language that actually can be mirrored up and matched into the language of our northern neighbour, and for our southern dialect is a southern language group. So they have the same words within those two language groups. Our customs in the regions, many of our language groups, multiple language groups, they share marriage laws, they share totems, customs, ceremonies. They do that together and it's all intertwined. On my Dunghutti on the north coast, there is 7 language groups that traditionally have traditional marriage names, and my great-grandfather's mother was always known to speak all 7 languages. She grew up in before European arrival in that area. No language group did live independently. We did have the relationships outside of our language group. So people would say the traditional map of Australia looks more like a European country. Yes, we did have customs laws to enter, but we intermarried and our relationships, we could not run independently. We just didn't have that cultural infrastructure to do so. So there are a lot of language groups and a lot of identities that make up Australia. and it differs from just the label of, First Peoples or Aboriginal to then that state-based kind of larger groupings to then traditional. But it does get a little bit more intriguing when it comes to identity within your language group or tribal group. Any questions so far on that? And I'm happy to revisit the previous screens if needed.
We've got another, we have had a question about acknowledgements of country, but I'm going to ask that a little bit later because I know you are addressing some of this. But one of the things I'd probably, often we've heard the phrase Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, sort of packaged up together as a thing. And the Torres Strait is a long, long way from here we are in Paramount country in South Australia. So is it only need to be done if you are close, in location, or there is a reason for specifically acknowledging Torres Strait Island people, or is it important that both the wider group of First Nations people are always acknowledged?
Yeah, look, no, I think in New South Wales, our state-based Aboriginal organisations and bodies, they would use just the term Aboriginal because they service just Aboriginal people from this area. Traditionally, there was no Torres Strait Islanders living within our area. It gets a little bit different in Queensland because of the state-based services do service the Torres Strait as well. So a lot of their state government bodies do have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the labelling of that. I think Aboriginal or First Peoples would be appropriate if you're away, you're not near the Torres Strait Islands. But then if you have a Torres Strait Islander employee that's relocated to near your area, I would think then just bringing that in as a Indigenous First Peoples just to cover that, so no offence needed. But I know that in North Queensland, the work that I've done with the people up there, there is a distinct identity between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and they both sides remind each other of that.
I guess you never know who your audience is, do you? We don't know if we've got Torres Strait Island people in the audience without asking everybody specifically. So that means best practice is just to include both.
Yeah, and you can do that.
Or to use the general term First Nations people or First People.
Yeah, so it's around what you're comfortable, I suppose. It's around, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, Indigenous or First Peoples. I think it's the term that you are when you do an acknowledgement or addressing. You can do that so it brings them together. Yeah.
Could you jump back to that the one that had the different Australia with the different not the different language groups but the different groups of the cultural groups or the labelling group.
Yeah.
So is this just names that First Peoples use in general when they're referring to people of different groups, or is this something that non-Aboriginal people should feel comfortable to say the Nanga people in general when they're talking?
I think so. I think it depends on how comfortable you are with that relationship that you have with the people, but also on the education. So it could be very offensive if you went to Queensland and said, "Are you Guri?" Because it's, well, no, I'm not on, or you wouldn't assume that people that are in Perth that are Noongar, they're actually Murris because you've spent some time with Aboriginal people in Brisbane. It just doesn't work like that. So I think, but to show an Aboriginal person that's from that area, if you wanted to in South Australia do an acknowledgement, you acknowledge, the local people and also the wider Noongar people. It just shows that your education levels are a bit better than someone just acknowledging Indigenous peoples.
We wouldn't refer to them as Noongar people in our acknowledgement of country, would we? Like,
No.
would you be more specific?
Yeah, I think that's in general. Like if a non-Aboriginal person was having a conversation and they said, "Oh, what Koori family do you belong to?" Then that shows me that they had a bit of education on Aboriginal families in New South Wales and Victoria. So it shows them a way where you can then connect. And it's a good connecting mechanism that we have with not only Aboriginal people, because that's what we do, but non-Aboriginal people. So if whatever region that you're from in Australia and are interested in this, if you can do some research and connection to Aboriginal people, and you can ask those questions. What local group are you from? What would I call you? Koori, Murri, Yolngu? What are you comfortable with? And 9 times out of 10, Aboriginal people are happy to give that information over because they're very proud in their background and family.
Right. And we've had a question on the Q&A from Jessica, who asks if there's any online resources that you can recommend, particularly to help identify the traditional land that you're specifically on. So, you've got an address of where you're holding an event. Is there somewhere you can look up and find out what is the correct land at that address?
Yeah, there's not a one-stop shop, so you have to do some research. And a lot of this can be undertaken by either a state body, so there's nothing nationally, but there's state bodies in different states that do that, but also local land council or traditional owner groups. And it's easy now with Google and other things where they can do the searching for you, to enter that in and then just double check if possible. So unfortunately, I know that there's an app being developed that would identify the country that you're standing on. But I don't think it's at a position where you'd be referring people to use it at the moment. So I would suggest just doing a bit of desktop research and then making some inquiries to your local land council or traditional owner organisation.
I guess even knowing who the local land council is a barrier for some of us. We don't know that. So
Yeah, and it differs from state to state. So it depends on what state you are in, and stuff. I know that there are land councils in Queensland, but there's also shire councils as well, where in New South Wales, every inch of New South Wales has a local land council and a database and where you can look at that. So it does vary from state to state. Some states may not have land council base, but they'll have either Aboriginal corporations or traditional owner groups within that region. So I think the best part is to start is with local Aboriginal organisations, land councils, or traditional owner groups.
right. Okay, thanks very much.
If there's no other further questions on that, we might just skip ahead. So with these layers of identity, I just wanted to have a discussion and give you an opportunity to try and understand from an individual's point of view. Yes, we do have, for me personally, I do have the Aboriginal or First Peoples national tag that I have. I do have a Guri or Koori, which is, if you think about it, New South Wales, Victoria, but New South Wales. So it's a state-based identity that I have. And then I have Dharawal, which is my language or nation group that I identify with. But from that is we have varying internal identities coming down. So an individual status is just a totem status that Aboriginal people have. Not all Aboriginal people have an individual status or totem, but traditionally you would have been given your totem. And Warrigal for us is just the wild dingo. So we call a dingo dingo when it's tamed as a pet. A clan is your family group, and you identify where I'm from. We identify with our mother's family group, and that could range, but you might have 5 or 6 different clan or family groups within your dialect region or your language region, and you may be connected to all of them, but you sit within your mother's region. Clan within that region. Then we have region, and where we are is called the area we live in now is Gamingul, so it's the region that you live and work in. And Gamingul for us is just people belonging to Botany Bay or that large body of water. And that is a collective term for multiple clan groups to actually live together in one layer of identity. And then no matter where you are in Australia, you'll always have Aboriginal people talking about the environment they come from. So in Sydney here, we call the term Gadigal is saltwater people. Gadu for us is salt, and we have saltwater people, and Darugul is freshwater people. So if you have a relationship with Aboriginal people or know of Aboriginal people, they'll always say, I'm a saltwater person or I'm a freshwater person. It's two distinct groups. And then we have a national, our language or nation group. When I do these presentations, and they're usually with live people, we usually do an interaction where I would ask them a series of questions and then they'll give it back. But from an individual, so we'll go from for them to understanding the answer someone would give on the identity that they have depends on the questions being asked and the situation that there is. So what I ask people is usually to take themselves back to when they were a child playing in the street with other children in their street. And for me, I would use my personal information so it's easier for you to understand. So I grew up in a street called Hereford Street with many young families. If I was playing football, touch football, or riding a bike with other kids, and a new kid came into that street to live, they moved into a house up the road, at the end of the street, sorry, they would come down to play and they'd introduce. And I'd say, hi, I'm Michael. And they'd say, hi, I'm John. I am from number 12. And I'd say, hi, I'm from number 22. So, and number 22 is the big grey house at the end that you can see. So that's in Hereford Street. I grew up in a suburb called Botany. So in that street, if I was playing from other kids from Botany and they are at a local park and they asked me, where are you from? I wouldn't say I'm from Botany because we're both from Botany. I'd say I live in Hereford Street. I wouldn't say number 22 because there are multiple 22s within the suburb of Botany. So I would say I'm from Hereford Street. If I was playing with someone from a neighbouring suburb, just say Mascot near Sydney Airport, and we're playing at a school event and they'd say, where are you from? I'd say I'm from Botany, and they'd say, I'm from Mascot. I wouldn't say I'm from number 22 or I'm from Hereford Street because they may not have known where that is. And then if we're playing from someone from another suburb like Northern Sydney or even Newcastle, Hunter Valley, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the Hunter Valley. But if we were playing with someone from the Hunter Valley, I'd say I'm from Sydney. Where are you from? I'm from the Hunter Valley. I'd say, hi, I'm from Sydney. Oh, yeah, I know Sydney. Whereabouts? I'm near the airport of Botany. So depending on their knowledge that they have for the answer. And then from someone from South Australia, I'd say I'm from New South Wales. Someone from America, I'd say I'm from Australia. So depending on the person that you're interacting with is the level of identity that you give. And layers of an Aboriginal identity from that I'm Aboriginal, I'm Koori, I'm Dharawal, and then break it right down to an individual status, if depending on the person's knowledge of that, our identity systems. So it gets very, very complex at times, but people will just say, where are you from? Yep. And I'll take that one identity as being identity for all, which may not necessarily be the same. Similar to if you identify from your house number to your street, to your suburb, to city, to state, to country. It's the same identity structure. Any questions on that? And I'm sorry I was a bit quick on that, but no, that's
No,
good.
there doesn't seem to be any questions.
No,
So
that's good. This is the part that we're all waiting for. So for our next section is when it's appropriate time for acknowledgement of country. So I think if you have daily team meetings within your company, I don't think it's appropriate because you meet every day. It isn't appropriate for an acknowledgement of country. I don't think so. I think you just get down to planning, get down to what's needed for the day and business as usual. In weekly division meetings, if it's a large group of people that meet, yes, and in particular, if it's a part that is encouraged by the workplace, definitely, but not required or undertaken if not if appropriately. So if you don't feel comfortable in doing it, don't do it. Monthly staff meetings, yes. I would encourage monthly staff meetings for acknowledgement of country, in particular if management attends. And this shows the company's commitment to First Nation policies, strategies, but also for Aboriginal staff or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff within the company. It feels like they're obviously respected from a cultural point of view. At workplace events, I think yes, and this is similar to monthly staff meetings. Company meetings, similar to daily meetings, but company meetings with external stakeholders. Like weekly division meetings. So company meetings with external stakeholders, especially if they're visitors within the same industry. Acknowledgement of country would be good. This would show that the company, but also you as an individual, is committed to First Nations people, not only in the workplace and the industry, but as a whole. And not only you as an individual, but the company can become a leader within this space, in particular if it's foreign within the industry. Again, if you're meeting on a regular basis, it would be up to the discretion or the comfortability of the individual for acknowledgement of country, but as long as it's showcased throughout yours. And then conferences. Yes, I would suggest acknowledgement of country, but only after a welcome to country has been done. And if not, if a welcome to country can't be done, replace it with an acknowledgement of country, but do not kill it. Do not kill an acknowledgement of country. Do not do an overkill. And we'll get to a bit of that in the next slide. Hopefully you understand what I mean by do not kill it. So here's an example of a 2-day conference. And if you have a look at the 9 to 9:30 session, we've highlighted that there's a welcome to country by Uncle John Smith, who's a local traditional owner of the area. So Uncle John will come in and do a welcome to country on the conference, the 2-day conference. On day 2, Peter Little, who's the MC, is doing an acknowledgement of country to acknowledge him. And for that, Peter will mention, yesterday we had a welcome to country by Uncle John Smith, who's a traditional owner of our local area. I'd like to thank Uncle John for doing that, and I would like to acknowledge day 2 and go into that acknowledgement. What we don't, as an Aboriginal person, what I don't like to see is that the keynote speaker from the 9:30 session will actually do an acknowledgement of country. Then you go and have morning tea, and then the MC for the panel at 11 o'clock will do a welcome to country, and so on and so on. And you're finding that there's acknowledgement of country 6 or 7 times throughout a day is just too much. It's too much, and it sort of starts to have a negative effect on people, where the welcome to country is, yes, it's a traditional something that's carried on from a traditional aspect, but it's also an education piece, and so is an acknowledgement of country. But to repeat, a lot of people do get sick of it, and it's just not, from an Aboriginal person and an Aboriginal point of view, it just starts to get uncomfortable.
And Michael, this is exactly the question that Gary asked earlier, is why do some government meetings have multiple speakers giving an acknowledgement of country? And I think you've answered that beautifully, because you're saying it's not necessary, and obviously somebody in government thought it was and made people do it, and at every speaker, but what you're saying is that's really not necessary.
No, and I think they do that just because it's something that when they started to implement it, they didn't think, the consultation wasn't done great, but I think our times have changed. Education within, especially in Australian society, has changed on Aboriginal people as well for the better. Where 15, 20 years ago, someone would have said, let's do acknowledgement every time someone speaks, which is great, but it's not needed now. So I think that, like we all know government, they're very slow to change. So hopefully they do soon. And I think this is a great example on what that welcome to country and acknowledgement of country would needed for a 2-day conference. Basically, it's twice. One welcome, one acknowledgement, and then let's get on to business. So examples of an acknowledgement to country, and I'll go through and I'll read these out. And these are very, I wouldn't say simple, but these are very easy and cover to be satisfied if you wanted to show that respect and give a welcome to country. So the first one is, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. That's it. It's simple, it's easy to read. And what you're doing is you're not saying that someone owns a piece of land over me, someone owns my own private land, house that my family live in. They're not saying that. What this is saying that is traditionally Aboriginal people would have lived here prior to European arrival, and some still have that connection. And I think that for this is also allows people to be safe. And when I mean safe, I like to be safe. I don't like to offend people. I don't try and speak to if I'm an expert in an industry that I'm not. So for this, it's a great one, and people can use this if they, especially when they travel for work and they're having a lot of conferences and work meetings and stuff. They could acknowledge this any place in Australia, and it's satisfying. The second one is something that you would do, I think, if you hold a lot of those external meetings and conferences within a certain place, maybe in a workplace, where you can then investigate or research who the people and nation that they belong to. And it's very similar to the first one. It's just you're adding in that extra part. And I will read it, and I'll use myself as an example where I'm at. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gamigal people of the Dharawal Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. It's as simple as that. So people do feel comfortable in and knowing the local people and the language or nation that they represent. It's an easy thing to insert for this. So
Jumping with a question there.
Yep.
Jess has asked, are there instances where we say past, present, and emerging? So I've heard this quite a lot. People say elders past, present, and emerging. Or is
Yeah,
just past and present okay?
I think past and present's okay. Emerging's okay, but if you start to talk to every demographic, then you're going to be there for a while. I think, you can even change it by saying, pay my respects to Aboriginal people or First Nations people across Australia. I think that's if you want to do it general, but elders past and present is sufficient enough, because in a lot of Aboriginal communities, our elders are our knowledge holders, so they're highly respected. All right, questions. Now I've left about 10 minutes for question time. If there's any questions that come up, please do send them through so I can try and answer to the best of my ability. But to be honest, I don't really like questions, so if there's none, I'm fine with that also.
And I'm only throwing in questions just in case. I'm sure if I've got a question, other people are sort of thinking it as well. Can you go back to the example, the slide before, you were talking about the words you can use? Is it better to say the people of like I started today saying I'm on Pergamon country. Is it better to actually just name the country, or should we be acknowledging the people of that country? Does
Uh,
it matter?
no, it doesn't matter. It's usually your land come together. So it's the same identity. It's just the dialects that get a little bit different. You can have different dialects, labeling of those dialects. But I just think that even if you write this out, we meet today on lands we meet today, and you just put in the nation. So, for instance, in here where I am in Sydney, meet today the Dharawal nation and pay my respects, or the Dharawal people and pay my respect. So I don't think that there's no when you choose a layer of identity, there's no wrong or right answer. So a lot of this is through, I've heard some identify a community of people, so the community that they're known today, which is great. Um, so yeah, so it just depends on how you structure and also your level, the confidence of the knowledge that you know.
Fantastic. Look, I will give people a couple more minutes just to think of some questions and type them in. And while we do, each time we do a webinar, we just throw a poll up. So I'll get Alex to throw up the poll just to here at Wine Communicators, we are tracking to see whether or not we're delivering the kinds of webinars that are relevant to you. So Alex will pop up this quick poll that asks how relevant the webinar was for you today. If you just quickly answer that, that would be fantastic. Just provides us with some data, and then throw any more questions that you've got into that Q&A box, so that we've captured them. Even if we don't answer them today, if you ask them here now, Michael can answer them by email later. So another question has come in, Michael. How would you suggest to build on the basic acknowledgement of country while being authentic and respectful?
Yeah, I think
So
it's
if somebody wants to go further than just that one sentence.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we've had previously in our work that we've worked with a lot of corporate Australia executives, and it's around their experience and their connection to Aboriginal people. So I know that the former CEO of Westpac, Peter King, he actually does his in the local language, an acknowledgement of country, and he explains that he has a good relationship with traditional owners from the Laparoos Aboriginal community. So he used to do that at Westpac conferences and events and stuff like that. I know that other executives from larger corporates, they have done theirs where it actually they talk about their childhood relationship with Aboriginal people, especially those that grew up in rural areas, and they had relationships with other kids whose parents worked on a farm. So they would have that relation and they'll express that. So depending on how your knowledge and how long it gets, I think it's up to you and your status. But again, the acknowledgement really too is yes, you're acknowledging, but actually sharing your story and an education piece on that, either local area or the relationship that you have with Aboriginal people. I think it's great, and I always like to hear that kind of stuff.
So as an example, maybe we might have some winemakers or some people from wineries on the call today. And wine being an agricultural thing which relies on the seasons and everything, I guess if we made a comparison in our acknowledgement of country about the connection that Aboriginal people have to seasons and the importance of seasons and reflecting on how we as winemakers or grape growers might as well. Is that okay, or is it a bit offensive?
No, I think it's not offensive. I don't think it is. I think it's getting that understanding. So I talked about how my family are from the mid north coast, fair on New South Wales, a fair large of my family. The practices of looking after farms, looking after livestock, especially backburning in those regions. The farmers up there still tells the stories of how their grandparents and great-grandparents learnt from my family on how to do that. So when you talk about that, they learnt a lot of practices to care for that land. And when you hear stories that are 3, 4 to 5 generations old, stories are being passed down, that gives people the insight on what it was like for Aboriginal people, connection to land as well, stories, relationships, all of that kind of stuff. So it may sound weird, but I think multi-generation farmers have the closest relationship to land than that of Aboriginal people.
Fantastic. I hope that answers the question. I think it does. I think we've got one more here. Just scroll down. We've just had somebody who's just really thanked you, said, Michael, this is incredibly helpful. Can you recommend a resource to research and learn the pronunciation of terms?
Yeah, look, I think everyone has the way that they pronounce things. I remember my grandmother would say something different than how I would say it, especially around language. Um, and because I know that my language pronunciation comes from very basic English, so the English was my first language. So a lot of my language words that I use is very English based, where my grandmother was different. Language was her first language, and then English came after that. So she used to say a lot of stuff with that heavy language accent. But I think around it's what you need to do is have a look what your local Aboriginal community and that say and how they pronounce things. And yes, it may be hard to do, but the biggest teacher, like anyone these days, are YouTube. So you can hear people pronounce words and say things. So yeah, I think it's around that research and then asking the question, do I say it right? You'll know if you don't pronounce it right, if or say it right if you get laughed at. So that's usually the key.
I'm just going to share a resource actually that I am aware of, and that is that so Wine Australia has actually just released a document. Sorry, I'm just going to the document. So Wine Australia just released a document that actually is a guide here, so it can be found on their diversity equity and inclusion page. And if you scroll down through engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, you'll find a section called Acknowledgement and Welcome to Country Guide. And what that document is a PDF that you can use that has a lot of references. And answering maybe Jess's question before, there's in that a link to the map that can help you identify. And it does reference maybe using Google or YouTube to understand how to pronounce things.
And sorry, there's also a lot of language programs that differ from state to state or area to area, and a lot do have apps. So my local language, my community have developed an app where people can download to their phone, and it's that audio, so they get to know how to pronounce the word for that object that they're looking for.
Right. So have you got a link to that app? Do you know? Have you?
Yeah. So I'll share that if that's
Share that with
okay.
Alex. If you share that with Alex, we'll make sure that that goes in the email when we send out the recording so that everyone's got a copy of that,
Yeah.
and also the link to the resource from Wine Australia. You'll notice in Wine Australia's resource, their recommendations are still to do as best practice to still do an acknowledgement of country in internal meetings. But as you've heard from Michael, it's not necessary for daily meetings. So I think it's about introducing a bit of your own judgment here and not being too prescriptive, but understanding what's important to communicate. And now that you understand the meaning of the acknowledgement of country, hopefully you feel a lot more comfortable about doing that. We're about to wrap up. I'd just like to thank Michael very much for preparing today's session for us and for giving up his time to talk to us and being so open to any of our questions. It's been really fantastic. Like I said, we'll send you the link to the Wine Australia written resource in the email. And this is our first webinar for 2026. And next month, we've actually got another webinar using Georgia Rasmussen, who presented data at the DTC Summit last year. So if you missed the summit, you'll catch some of those insights in our next webinar. And also to all of the Wine Communicator members that are on board here, thank you so much. And thank you. If you aren't yet a member, join now so that you can watch these kinds of webinars for free. And if you have any questions or suggestions on webinars, topics in the future, please email Alex at wca@winecommunicators.com.au. And we're pretty much done. Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a real pleasure having you on board.
Thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Bye.